sano baa u dhaxayn jirtay kanna wuxuu ku tusayaa Puntland siday ugu nugushahay daadadka ama falaadhinka haddaa fiirisid 50% of Puntland territory waxay vulnerable u tahay daadka 20 waa high risk dhulkeena coastal areas particularly prone to floods due to low line topography maadaama ayba xeebtabay yaalaan dhulka xeebaadka baduna laftigeedu sea level rise baa dhacay oo baddu way kacday marka maapka baa ku tusinaya meelaha falaadhka u nugul iyo percentageskan climate projections for the region waxyaabii la ogaaday kulaylku inuu sii kordhayo sidoo kaleeto inuu likely increase in rainfall availability kulaylka iyo roobabka iyo waxa dhan ay wax iska bedeleen uumi baxa biyaha iyo waxaasoo dhanna inay maartay markii roobku da'aba maadaama kulaylka badan yahay biyihii uumi baxooda inuu aad u sareeyo kadibna ay hadhowta keenayso in biyihiiba isla markiiba guraan ama la waayo baddiyo kor u kacday oo hadda meelaha qaybtooda oo degmada caluul oo kaleeto meel 3 sano ama 4 sano ka hor meherada ahayd oo magaalo ahayd oo geeda ku yaaleen baa maanta baddu joogtaayo oo laga guuray kan wuxuu ku tusinayaa roobka hadda soo socdo aan sugayno oo dayrta ah oo October November December roobka hadda aan sugayno oo macnihii bari iyo raas casay region districtiga boosaaso caluulo iyo isku shuban oo meelaha yilowga ah macnihii meelaha maapka markaa fiirsi yilowga ka muuqda waxaa la filayaa inay roobka ay heli jireen mid ka hooseeya uu ka da'o hadda dayrtan hadda aan sugayno oo meelaha kale markaa fiirisidoo Southern bari aan karkaar sida qardho iyo bandarbayla oo meelaha cagaarka au ka muuqdana ayaguna roob u dhaxeeya intaas oo above normal ah inay helaan waa kan dayrta hadda aan sugayno oo soo socota baa laga yaabaa nugaal ayada laftigeedu roobkeedu wuxuu ku jiri doonaa meelaha normalka baa laga laakiin bari oo kaleeto iyo meesha la mudug haddaa fiirisid gaalkacyo jiriiban galdagob iyo cayn oo meelaha yelowga ku jira soonahaas ilaa buuhood ilaa gaalkacyo ilaa dhulkaas waxay muujinayaan oo meelaha yelowga ku jira inuu roobku maaragtay below average rains are more likely mean rangeland markaa waxay keenaysaa inuu roobku yaraado taasoo keenaysa haddii roobku yaraadana wax soo saarka daaqu inuu yaraan doono duurjoogta iyo xooluhuna markaa ay biyo iyo daaqba waayi doonaan taasina ay dhib keeni karto eastern meelaha bariga oo ay ka mid yihiin goboladaasina laakiin meesha ugu daran waxa weeye waa gobolka Sanaag oo kale haddaa fiirisid oo roobkii horeeto oo gugii horena uu ku yaraa dayrtuna hadda ku yartahay sida la saadaalinayo waxay khatar ugu jirtaa in mataqaanaa ay xaaladeedu isbedesho meelaha u baahan in isha lagu hayo marka maapkan waxaan ku soo koobayaa kii horena wuxuu ahaa gugii hore iyo sida uu da'ay kanna waa kan hadda dayrta aan sugayno soo socota waa boobsiinayaa marka isbeddelka cimiladu biyaha muxuu saameyn ku yeeshay wuxuu saameyn ku yeeshay inay yaraadeen oo tugagii iyo webiyadii waxaan leeyahay seasonal riverskeena oo haddii laasas laga qodan jiray ama biyo laga cabi jiray ama balliya aan lahayn wixii oo dhan inay yaraadeen markii roobku yaraadana biyaha dhulka hoostiisa ku jira oo ceelalka ama underground waterka inay ayaguna fogaadaan ama yaraadaan waayo way isku xiran yihiin sidoo kaleeto inuu ka dhex dhaco biyihii intii yareed inuu competition ka yimaado oo maaragtay dagaal ka dhaco oo khilaafyada ugu badan oo dee hadda Puntland ama Soomaaliya ka dhaca waxay salka ku hayaan ama biyo la isku qabtay ama daaqsin la isku qabtay ama macnihii khayraadka dabiiciga oo yaraaday bay salka ku hayaan kadibna biyaha tayadooda iyo waxooda dhan inay xumaadaan wax iska bedelaan maapka ama sawirkan waa sawiro laga qaaday Puntland kan xagga meeshan waa qashin qub kamid ah qashin qubyada Puntland kaasina waa IDB ku yaala boosaaso oo daad ku fatahay kana waa buundadiyo because of climate change daad ku gooyay dadkii oo barakacay oo qaxootiye iyo isu bedelay oo noqday saameynta uu ku yeeshay agriculture-ka reduce waxa kamid ah in wax soo saarkii beeraha iyo wixii maadaama aan ku xirannahayba roobka aan ku xirannahay oo beeraheenu ay rainfed farms yihiin inuu wax soo saarkoodu yaraaday dalagyadii iyo wixiina ay hoos u dhac ku yimaadeen xoolihiina ay baaba'aan ama dhimashadooda iyo waxoodu ay badato sidoo kaleeto cayayaano iyo cudurro aan horey u jiri jirin inay markaas yimaadaan oo hadda Puntland sanadadii horeeto kaleeto ayax guurayo Yemen ka yimid baa yimid oo beerihii iyo daaqsintii iyo wixii oo dhanba baabi'iyey ama waxa dhici karta in dirindiir markii roobku da'o kaleeto ay ku kacdo daaqsintii iyo wixii oo ay ayadana cunto saamaynta uu badda ku yeeshay isbeddelka cimiladu xogtan wasaaradda kalluumaysiga ila wadaagtay waxa waaye in temperature-ku ama uu kor u kacay waa isla wada garanay in weatherkii oo dhan wax iska bedeleen baddiina kor u kacday ocean identification ay badda acidic noqotay oo tusaale ahaan markii climate change-gu oo greenhouse gaseskan iyo waxyaabahan la sii daynayo oo sida carbon dioxide-ko kaleeto markay la falgalaan biyahoo kaleeto waxa samaysmaya waxa la yidhaahdo carbonic acid oo kaleeto kadibna baddu inay noqoto acidification ama mid acid ah maxaa ka dhashay marka waxaa ka dhashay inuu yaraado kalluunkii la helayey oo mataqaanaa tiradii ay yaraato sidoo kaleeto costigii ile markuu yaraado lacagtii lagu soo maaragtay kaaga baxaysay inaad kalluumaysatid iyo wixii o dhan inay kacaan sidoo kaleeto isbeddelka cimiladu inuu damage u geystay meelihii yaryaraayoo maaragtay dekedihii yararkaa dabiiciga ahaa ama meelihii yaryaraa khuuriyadii inuu jejebiyey oo ama kalluumaysatada ku tiirsanay ama ku soo xiran jirteen inuu keenay coastal erosion oo bacaad guurayo oo deegaanada xeebaha ah aad ugu badan oo hadda waa aragteen kulub iyo meesha la garacad iyo dhinowda iyo inay maaragtay gebigoodii bacaad qaateen sawirkan xagga xiga waa meesha la yidhahdo kulub iyo daraasad wasaaraddu ka samaysay sawirro aan ka soo qaadnay meesha la yidhaahdo deegaanka kulub oo u dhow garacad halkan waxa waaye impactiga isbeddelka cimilada uu daaqsinta iyo noolayaasha kala duwan uu ku yeeshay in ay mataqaanaa dhirtii waddanka dhaladka u ahayd ay sii dabar go'ayso oo mid kale beddelayso kuwii aan gaarka u lahayn oo endemiga ahaa laftigooda inay tir ahaan iyo tay ahaanba yaraanayaan sidoo kaleeto dhulka xeebaha hadda bacaadku qariyey shimbirihii ku noolaan jiray oo breeding ku samayn jiray oo ku tarmi jiray in ayaga laftigooda uu damage u geystay deegaankii iyo meesha ay deganaan iyo wixii oo dhan sidoo kaleeto wixii aan ka heli jiray daaqsinta ama sabadeegaaneedku inuu hoos u dhacay ugaartii oo kale inuu tiradeedii hoos u dhac ku yimid gaar ahaan kuwa nuujinayoo kaleeto ama kuwa yaryaroo kaleeto maadaama abaartii iyo biyihii iyo wixii o dhan ay wuxuu kaleeto keenay in duurjoogtii iyo bil'aadankii khilaaf ka dhexeeya uu dhaco oo markii abaartii dhacday biyihii intii yareed ama ceelkii baa waxaa isugu imaanaya duurjoogtii iyo dadkii kadibna hadda mararka qaarkood marka abaaruhu dhacaan waxaa arkaysaa ceelasha laga cabayo doofaar rabo inuu biyaha cabo soo weerarayo iyo dadkaoo la dagaalayo iska cayrinaya marka duurjoogtii iyo dadkii in dagaal ka dhex dhaca bay bilowday maabkan waa meelaha bacaadku Puntland uu mataqaanaa ku habsaday ama ka jiro oo markaa fiirisid lejinka ama maabku meelaha u indicate garaynayo baa waxay ina toosinaysaa meelaha Puntland bacaadka guuraya xeebaha uu ku habsaday ama uu joogo halkan waa impactiga uu caafimaadka ku yeeshay waqtiga aad u kooban oo ninkaana waqtiga ii haya marka waxaan ognahay inuu keenay stress iyo mataqaanaa xanuuno inuu keenay ama xanuuno waterborne diseases oo daadadku markay yimaadaan oo kaleeto oo biyihii ay qashinkii iyo wasakhdii iyo wixii galaan oo dadka isticmaalaan xanuunada biyaha wasakhaysan ka dhasha inay dadkii ku dhaceen oo keenay sidoo kaleeto nafaqa darro ama mataqaanaa inuu keenay iyo dadka xooluhu ka dhammaadeen ama abaaruhu ku ama beerahoodii ku dhaceen inay xanuuno maskaxeed iyo bahalkii iyo stresskaasi uu ku rido ama ay keenaan waa ognahay saamaynta ama dhibaatada uu geystay infrastructure-keenna oo waddooyinka hadda la dhiso wadda hadda la dhisayaa ayadoo tayadeeda iyo waxeeda la hagaajiyey baa roob ama daad baa imaanaya daadkuu diman marka waddooyinka hadda la dhisayo haddaan laga dhigin climate friendly oo tusaale ahaan daadadka waddada kusoo rogmanaya isbaarooyinkii hakin lahaa aan la samayn mar kastoo aan waddo samey waayo marka hore dhulkeenu dhir buu lahaa iyo caws daadadkaa yaraa waddooyinku saasay inoo ku nabad qabeen laakiin hadda maadaama dhulka xaalufay oo daadku badan yahay waddooyinka hadda la dhisayo haddaan lagu lamaanin ama lagu kordhin infrastructures kaleeto oo meesha daadku ka imaanayo waddada biyuhu uga imaanayaan ama dhagaxuun la dhigo ama biyo hakinno la dhigo haddaan lagu kordhin tayada si kastoo loo adkeeyo waayo biyo ka xog badan baa imaanaya marka way ayaduna waa damageska uu u geystay waa ka xumahay timekii baa dhacay marka intaasaan kusoo koobinaya ciddii barstageka PDRC baan u diro la wadaagay ciddii marka ayadaa idinla wadaagi doonta ciddii rabto waa mahadsantihiin
aad buu mahadsan yahay liibaan oo runtii inala wadaagay prestation aad u qiimo badan waktiga waa arkaysaa saan u ilaalinayno waktigu waa wax inoo ku muhiimsan oo aan u joogno midda labaadna waa ku darayaa buuqii iyo xoogaa qeyladii aanu markii horena ka hadalnay weli gadaal wuu ka jiraa waa laga cabaraya marka waxaan ka codsanayaa kasoo qaybgalayaasha in hadalka iyo toonka hoos loo dhigo haddana waxaan kusoo dhaweynayaa agaasimaha wasaaradda arrimaha gudaha agaasime maxamed cali faarax oo isaguna nala wadaagi doona perspectiveka ama wasaaradda arrimaha gudaha oo iyo dib u heshiisiinta iyo arrimaha dimuqraadiyadda
ka yar baan qaadanaya 5 daqiiqo baa aqrinaya بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين marka hore waxaan halkan uga mahadcelinayaa dhammaan kasoo qaybgalayaasha maalinta nabadda adduunka iyo shirkan caadada oo ah maalinta nabadda aynu qabanno oo uga mahadcelinayo hay'adda PDRC runtii isku hawshay inay ka dhigto shir joogto ah oo mar walba ay si caado leh loo diyaariyo oo looga soo qayb galo aaraa iyo afkaarna la isku wadaarsado maalin marba mawduucna xoogga la saaro oo laga wada shaqeeyo waxaan bahwadaag lanahay in ka badan 25 sano hay'adda PDRC iyo wasaaradda arrimaha gudaha iyagoo isku lifaaqa inta badan xooggana saara nabad dhiska iyo dawlad dhiska Puntland guud ahaan gaar ahaan Puntland guud ahaan Soomaaliya waan uga mahadcelinaynaa shirkan maanta aynu fadhino 12 September maalinta nabadda adduunka qayb weyn ayaan ka qaadanay inaan kala shaqeyno hay'adda PDRC si uu u hirgalo shirkan maadaama aanu nahay wasaaradda arrimaha gudaha iyo dimuqraadiyadda iyo dib u heshiisiinta way ka mid tahay shaqada waajibaadka aanu qabanno in dadka nabad ay ku wada noolaadaan iyo si walaalnimo aan kala shaqeyno waxaan aad kale uga mahadcelinayaa ciwaanka sanadka aynu qaadanay si la isu waafajiyo nabadda iyo isbeddelka cimilada dhacaya oo runtii anaga ruuxayga saameyn weyn ugu yeelatay markaanu eegnay nabadaynta aan ka shaqeyno iyo dowrarka nabadda iyo khilaafaadka aan dhex galno ay xoog u yeelatay marka inahaasaan kusoo koobayaa aragtayda guud presentationkaygu wuxuu ka kooban yahay waa 20 slide waxaan rajeynayaa waqti inaan u reebi doono tiimka muxuu ahaa PDRC guud ahaan waxaanu ka shaqeynaa anagoo kaashanayna dowladda Puntland madaxtooyada iyo hay'adaha kale ee dowladeed in dowlad dhiska Soomaaliya aan qayb ka noqono iyadoo aan markaa gelinayno door weyn in siyaasad ahaan muxuu ahaa aan uga qayb qaadano xalalka dowlad dhisku Soomaaliya u baahan yahay oo ay ka mid tahay saddex geeskaas ah in horta marka hore la helo nabad iyo wada noolaansho si dowlad loo helo wanaagsan oo shaqeysa marka reconciliationka ayaan ka shaqeynaa inta badan oo xoogga saaraa waxaan kaloo door weyn ka qaadanaa oo wasaaraddu ay ka qaadataa federalismka oo iyadana aan xoog weyn ka saaro sidii dowlad federaal ah oo u qaybsata resourciga si federaal ah oo kala leh heerar iyo shuruuc iyo nidaam leh ayaan iyadana kala shaqeynaa qodobka saddexaadna oo aan ka wada shaqeynana waa dastuurka iyo waxa inoo yaalo xeerara iyo sidii loogu heshiin lahaa iyo waxa maaragtay ina ka dhaxeeya iyo waxa inoo u baahannahay inaan ka wada shaqeyno marka intaa saddexdaas gees ama saddexdaa dhardhaar la isla helo ayaa waxa la helaya wax la yiraahdo inclusive state building ama isku dhafan dowlad la wada leeyahay oo isku dhafan oo dhinacyo walba laga taagan yahay ay in la helayo marka inahaas waa inaan ka shaqeyno shaqada guud aan qabanno oo aan dowladda u qabanno waxaanu qiimeyn ku sameynay ilaa iyo 2021kii markii wasaaradda arrimaha gudaha qaybta dib u heshiisiinta lagu soo daray meelihii la maabgareeyey oo aan soo ururinay markaa khilaafaadkii jiray hab siyaasadeed ha u jireen ama hab maxaa ha u jireen khilaafaadku waaweynaa waxay ka mid ahaa political dispute badan baa jiray oo markaas colaado badan baa ka socday dhankaas Soomaaliland naga xigtay Puntland xuduudka la leedahay dhanka federaalkana iyadana waxba ka jiray badan waxa kaloo jiray xuduud beeleedyo iyo qabiilo beeleedyo degan xuduudaha u dhaxeeya Puntland iyo Galmudug iyagana waa ay jireen iyo dhibaatooyin ay abuurayeen argagixisadu ay ka shaqeynayeen oo ay shabaab iyo daacish oo inta badan aad ogtihiin Puntland dagaalka ay la martay iyo hawlaha ay la madhay waxyaabaha ugu waaweyn oo external muxuu ahaa aan conflictska oo jiray bay ahaayeen markaanu maabgaraynay oo aan markaas intaanu bilaabin dib u heshiisiinta waxyaabaha ugu waaweyn afartaas dhinac area baa inaga jirtay oo iyadu ay sida aan idiin sheegay siyaasadeed qaybtood ah iyo qayb argagixiso iyo qayb maaragtay muxuu ahaa shuruucda iyo dawlad dhiska iyo habka loo dhisay la isugu hayay intaasay ahayd iyaduna waxaa kaloo jiray konfliktiyo ka dhaca beelaha dhinacyadooda iyo within Puntland waxyaabaha ugu waaweyn oo aan qiimeyn ku sameeyna markaanu maabgaraynayno waxaa ka mid ahaa in resourciga uu ka yahay sida dhulka biyaha muxuu ahaa macdanta waxyaabahaas inay ahaayeen waxyaabaha inta u badan dadku ay ku murmaan oo lagu dagaalamo waxaa kaloo abuuraya iyadana dhaqaale xumo iyo muxuu ahaa shaqo la'aanta maanis ayaa waxay abuuraysay iyadana dad badan oo maaragtay reer guuraaya inay soo galaan markii ay xoolihii ka yaraadeen inay magaalooyinka soo galaan iyagoo aan aqoon badan u lahayn inay abuuraan xaalad kaleeto oo baalkiya waxyaabaha hay-adaha dawliga ah oo markaas iyaguna sida muxuu ahaa service deliveryga iyo cadaaladda iyo xogaa iska muxuu ahaa caqabado badan hor yaaleen oo iyagana laga shaqeynayo howlo badan laga qabanayay qabaa'ilada isdhexgala iyo meelaha territorialka isugu yimaadaan oo iyadana uu ka jiray iska nacayb uu mar walba imaanayay perception jiray dad dareemayay qaybtood inaysan cadaalad u sinaan usan jirin oo howlaha iyaga jiray qayb bay ka ahayd political competition baa jiray iyadana oo land dispute oo siyaasadda iyo loolan siyaasadeed iyo dhul la isku hayay iyadana caqabadaha jiray ka mid ahaayeen waxyaabaha markaa kaxaynaya waxaa ka mid ahaa fakriga conflictiga natural resourciga ah maxaa institutionska dawladda oo aan aad ula sii jaan qaadin colaadaha jira oo markaas maxkamadihii iyo dadkii xalin lahaa oo maxaa cilado badan ka jireen dhulka oo kaleeto isaguna ahaa waxyaabaha ugu cilada badan oo dadku ay isku hayaan oo tuuleysi iyo deegaamaysi cusub la sameynayo oo la isku dagaalayay inahaas waxay ahaayeen inihii markaas conflictiga gudaha ka jiray markaas aan u helnay waxyaabaha inta badan aanu dalagaalada aan markaan qiimeynayna sameynay meelaha ugu badan mudug bay ahayd dad badan oo qabaa'ila oo kala duwan baa degan qaabo nooc bay isu hayeen dhinacyo badan baa la iskaga hayay waxyaaba badan baa la isku baalkeenayay kuwa internal iyo external bay kala lahaayeen inahaasa iyadana aanu maaragtay ku sameynaynay markii dhanka waqooyi laga hadlo qabaa'ilo dhowra ayaa isku baalkeenayay marka easternka laga hadlo kuwa kaleeto within Puntland iyadana kuwa kale isku hayay marka waxyaabaha inta badan isku hayeen waa natural resource iyo dhul iyo xuduud iyo baraag baa la baalkeeyay iyo muxuu ahaa daaqiyo yaraaday iyo dadkii isu gudbaayay iyo waxyaabaha caqabadaha ugu badan haystay ka mid ahayd dhinanka kaleeto marka la iska eego gudaha Puntland iyadana colaadad ka dhowra oo soo noqnoqonaya iyadana ku xiran caqabadahaas isbeddelka cimiladu uu samaysay ama abaaraha ha noqday soo noqnoqonaya ama dhibaatooyinka soo noqonaya iyo dhulkii oo noqday nabaad guuray dadkii isku durkaya ayaa caqabadaha ugu badan ahaa tii ugu dambeysay hadda sanaag aan xalinay waxa la isku hayay waxay ahayd dooxo cidla tagtaan caqabad bay ahayd tii halkan ka dhacday boocame aageeda beelaha nugaali iyo soo lahayd iyadana meel cidla oo bini aadam isu degi karin baa la isku hayay marka waa dhul iyo waxaas la isku hayay oo maaragtay wax badan aan lahayn so far waxaan xalinay caqabado badan oo soo jiitamay muddo dheer marka la eego taa la eego waxaa ka mid ahayd caqabad dhul oo in badan 30 sano soo jidhay oo ka jidhay dhahar iyo qardha ka jidhay aageeda oo iyadana aan agreement sax ka gaarnay oo aan dhamaystiray labadii reeroodna hadda ay si sax u wada degan yihiin oo ay ka shaqeynayaan waxaa jidhay iyadana mid kale oo dhul oo la isku hayay oo caqabad ahayd oo daaqsimid iyo meel la isku hayay oo iyadana aan xalinay waxaa kaloo jiray mudug iyadana galdogob iyo bursaalax iyadana waxa weeye xal dhamaystiran baan ka gaarnay saaxmeygaag waa 90% waa xalinay weli wax yar oo macna lahayn baa dhiman oo isdaba raacina iyadana waa la gabagabeeyay xero jaalle laba reer oo isku hayba oo walaalaha ehela wada deganaa heer waxay gaareen ceelka biyaha ah inay qaybna ka cabto xero jaalle dhexdeeda qaybna ay ka cabto galdogob iyagoo oo aan kan ka dhaansan karin oo ka baqayo inay ka cabaan waan laba reer oo isku hayba oo walaalaha oo ehela waxay isku hayaana waa dhul iyo daaqsimeed iyo meelo iyo xaafado la isku hayay oo laga shaqeynayo tii ugu dambeysay muxuu ahaa waxay ahayd tii ka dhacday sanaag dureema dooxadii la isku qabtay oo liya aduguna ma degaysa anuu ma degaayo oo iyadana aad 9 qof 12 qof ay ku dhimatay oo dhibaato badan ay ka dhacday oo wax ka jira aysan jirin nolosha inteeda badan ka jirin inahaas waxay ahaayeen baalki waxa jira sheerbi oo aan u soo qaadano anagu hadda tusaale aayad quraana ilaahay ku sheegay kitaabkiisa oo runtii ay ka dhacday meeshaasi wahiya khawiyatun ala urushiha waxay noqotay magaalo aan ugu tagnay markaanu xalkeeda bilaabeynay dameer iyo nin curiyaan ah oo marka dambe garow u soo qaadnay kaliya aad joogay oo bixi waayey isagoo carari waayey intii kale oo ku noolay magaalada way iska tagtay waxaana ku noolaa 32 qabiil oo kala duwan hal qof kuma harin magaalada waxaanu ku jiray muddo 3 bilood iyo muddo 2 bilood 5 bilood baan ku jiray 5 bilood ka bacdi maantay waxa lagu wada nool yahay si rasmi ah oo walaalnimo ah nolol fiican baa ka jirta xaaladda ay soo madhay maantay 10 bay u noqotay inay maanta shaqeeyaan kuwii isku dagaalayay shalay maanta dagaalka caalamiskaad bay ku wada jiraan iyaga oo runtii iska barbar dagaalamaya oo ciidamada dowladda Puntland ka wada tirsan oo la qarameeyo la qabiileeyay marka hore ay qabiil ahaan isugu urursadeen hubkooda marka iyadana waa la xaliyay waa la dhameeyay inahaas waa inahan gaaray oo runtii aan guud ahaan gaaray ugu yaraan waxaan xalinay 8 caqabadood waaweyn oo jiray kuwa kale hadda gabagabay noo marayaan oo gacantan ku haynaa 3 eeriyo ayaa hadda wali aan la address gareynin oo iyada hawsheeda gacanta aan ku haynaa oo aan ku jiraa waxaan kaloo wasaaraddu ka shaqeysaa stabilizationka waa ogtihiin anaga waxaan la dagaalanay argixis caalami aan la dagaalanay waxaan kula dagaalanay buuraha calmiska laga soo bilaabay ilaa qandala ilaa isku shuban ilaa iyo ufayn ilaa iyo balididin ilaa dhaadaar ilaa caluula ilaa baargaal dagaalkaas aan soo qaadnay oo hadda maraya gabagabo waxaanu ka shaqeynay dadkii inaan dib ugu celinay meelihii waxaan ka shaqeynay inaan guddiyo u samayno nabadeed maadaama ay dhacday oo dadka qaybtood ayaa ku dhex milmay oo u baahnaa in xal laga gaaro oo iyagu ruuxood isugu colaadsaday marka horeeto kuwaas waa laga shaqeeyey waxaa la dhex dhigay guddiyaal loo sameeyey nabadda laga shaqeeyey business waxaa loo sameeyey peace communities baa loo sameeyey oo iyagu xaliya waxyaabaha ku yimaada dhexdooda maadaama toromo ay iska jirto oo dadkii niman bala ay ku dhex dagaalameen oo habaar qaba marka waxaan ka shaqeynay bal iyaga ruuxooda inaysan maaragtay noqonin marka waxaan ka qabanay oo kaleeto dhowr wacyigelin oo aan uga hadlayno khataraha amniga khataraha nabadda iyo wanaagga nabadda iyo sida loo wada qaban lahaa waan kala shaqeynay waxaa kaloo caqabad soo noqnoqotay inta badan ah draagiska oo inta badan ay colaaduhu ka kacaan qof baa dhimanaya 2 qof oo alcoholist way waa dilaya 2 beelood buu isu keenaya in arrintaasi ay caqabad keento ay ku dagaalamaan waxaa kaloo jira dad badan oo ismaagalin oo iyaguna ka shaqeeya insecurity-ga oo iyagu inta badan ka shaqeeya kalaam basic ku shaqeeya haddii wax laga qabtona beel isugu bedelayaan waxaa kaloo jira waxyaaba inta badan soo noqnoqda oo qabiilo aanooyin iyo waxyaaba badan hadda mudug naga haysta dhibaato naga haysato oo iyaduna caqabada oo mar walba soo noqnoqoto oo timaada hubka oo sharci darro ah saa ogtihiin Soomaaliya hubka wuxuu ku soo galaa si sharci darro ah baa lagu helaa caqabado badan buu keenay dad badan baa gacanta u galaa aad ogtihiin xaaladiisa iyo baalkiisa iyo inta badan oo borderska iyo meelaha xuduudaha dowlad goboleedyada iyo xuduudaha dowladnimada oo aan ahayn meelo sukuura ciidan ku filan iyo dad ku filan ay ka shaqeynay oo iyaduna caqabad kale ah oo laga shaqeeyo inahaas ayaa ku soo gabagabeynaya waa mahadsantihiin assalamu calaykum waraxmatullahi wabarakaatuh
aad buu mahadsan yahay sime maxamed cali faarax oo runtii presentation aad u qiimo badan koobanna inoo soo jeediyey oo waqtigii weliba uu yaraan 2 daqiiqo inuu ka tegey marka haddana waxaan u gudagelaynaa banel baan gelaynaa banelkan wuxuu ku bixi doonaa luuqadda af ingiriisiga waxaana uu ku saabsan yahay daahka qaadidda xiriirka ka dhexeeya isbeddelka cimilada amniga iyo nabadda iyo waxa la filayo ama la saadaalinayo mustaqbalka xiriirka ka dhexeeya saddexdaas siduu noqon doono banelkan waxaa ka qaybgeli waxaa inoo xiriirin doona cabdiraxmaan biixi waxaana ka qaybgeli doona waxaan soo dhaweynaya marka u horeysa moderatorka ama xiriiryaha waxaan ka codsanayaa tiimku inuu inoo soo dhigo inay inoo soo dhigaan kuraastii marka waxaanu ku wareejinayaa moderatorka cabdiraxmaan biixi si uu kugu yeero ka qaybgalayaasha panelka waa luqadda af ingiriisiga mana lahan runtii tarjumaad oo qof halkan soo fadhiisanaya oo tarjumaya ma jiro waxaan intaa ku darayaa waqtiga waxaan u beeqaaminaynaa marka aan qabanayno shir sanadeedka sanad kasta waxaa jira habeen loogu talagalay in si ballaaran looga dhargo oo cid kasta wixii su'aalo ah iyo wixii la soo bandhigaya lagu qabto oo la yidhahdo Pdrc Talks oo caawa haddii alla yidhaahdo inoo jiri doona marka waxaan ugu talagalnay wixii dadkii gastiga ahaa dad khubaro ah cid kastoo ka soo qayb galaysa ciddii su'aal qabta habeenka ilaa 3 saacadood ilaa 4 saacadood inta laga gaarayo ayuu socdaa marka waxaan doonayaa haddii alla yidhaahdo inaan waqtiga halkan koobno caawaynu ka faa'iidaysana haddii alla admo waqti dheer qaadan doona insha allah waxaan ku soo dhaweynaya cabdiraxmaan
Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, government officials, distinguished guests, international partners. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Welcome to today's important topic, a topic that affects us all. And my name is Abdurrahman Bihi. I have the privilege of moderating this deep dive session. In this session, we intended to unpack the current realities, future projections, and the nexus between climate, peace, and security that affect us in Somalia. We gather here for the second day. No. Thank you. And so in this session, we try to unpack the current realities and future projections and maybe explore more on the nexus between peace, climate, and security that affects us all in our country. As we gather here for the second day of the APC conference, since yesterday we are reminded through paper presentations, studies, and panel discussions, and even this morning, the challenges, the present challenges that this topic presents to us. In a world that we face increasingly shaped by climate change, insecurity, and failed peace processes, the impact of environmental degradation, resource scarcity, are not merely ecological concerns. There are, however, fundamental issues including human behavior that threaten our collective security, the stability of communities around the globe, but more specific to fragile states like Somalia. Today, we have the privilege of hearing from a remarkable panel of experts who bring wealth of knowledge and diverse perspectives to this critical discourse. They will illuminate how climate change exacerbates conflict, undermines peace-building efforts, and poses threat to our shared security. Together, we will explore not only the challenges, but also pathways to solution and how we can foster resilience and promote sustainable practices. I encourage every one of you this morning to engage the conversation as your insights and experiences may help us to understand better this discourse and maybe perhaps find an actionable outcomes. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming our esteemed guests of panelists on the stage. I will be calling them in order. I'd like to call Hassan Abdurrazak Ahmed, who serves as the Deputy Portfolio Manager in Resilience and Climate Change Portfolio at the UNDP Somalia. Abdurrazak brings an extensive knowledge and experience in the field of nature, climate, and energy. Hassan is dedicated to addressing the critical challenges posed by environment and economic dynamics. He holds advanced academic qualifications on environment and economics, providing solid foundation. Welcome Abdurrazak to the stage. Next, I'd like to call Sarah Kim from Somali Stability Fund. Sarah is a conflict reconciliation and climate advisor for Somali Stability Fund. She was formerly with the USAID Somalia as a senior stabilization advisor and the chief of party of the USAID office in transition initiatives programs in Ethiopia with over 15 years of experience. Sarah has graduated a degree from Georgetown University and Masters of International Affairs from Columbia University. And next, I'd like to call Lula Sharif, who is a program officer with the Somali Joint Fund. She has over a decade of experience with the pool of funding across the UN systems in humanitarian and development contexts. I also would like to call Justin Norman, who is a senior researcher at the Danish Institute for International Studies, DISS, specializing in conflict, security, and development, with fieldwork experience across Somalia, territories, Kenya, Tanzania, and South Sudan, and Ukraine. His research foregrounds anthropological perspectives to offer new insights into the humanitarianism and the dynamics of international interventions, mainly focusing on particularly on how Somali communities, including the diaspora, navigate complex crises and recover from conflict. Are we missing anyone? Yes, lastly but not the least, I would like to call on Dr. Ali Ibrahim. Ali Ibrahim is a peace building and climate security expert with over 15 years of experience in the Horn of Africa. He designs cross-border initiatives linking climate resilience with peace and governance, influencing policy across several countries. A trainer with Austria Center for Peace, he recognized as for pioneering local climate policies and promoting women's leadership and governance. All right, so we will be starting with a panel discussion, and we'll be given an opportunity for audience to also join us and share their insights and experiences later on. Well, thanks everyone and for joining us. I would like to pose a couple of questions, and I would like the first question to be generic one. So I'll ask you to take 2 to 3 minutes to reflect on your experience and maybe your area of expertise of work. And we would like to frame the nexus and try maybe to elaborate more on the nexus between these interlinkages by starting with two key stages, or maybe 2 key insights from your work that can help us better understand the complex relationships between climate, conflict, and security. And why is it important for us maybe to understand these interlinkages now? Maybe if I start with Lola. Lola, you would like to go ahead?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Excellencies. Good afternoon, colleagues, and thank you, moderator. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for organizing this important forum at the very critical time. In my experience, I'd like to approach this question in 2 insights. The first one is climate stressor amplifies existing vulnerabilities. Somalia faced a number of climate shocks just in the last couple of years, and especially recurrent droughts and floods and resource scarcity and potential, pastoralist and agro-pastoralist communities. And this environment pressure often fuels competition over scarce resources, and this results to inter-clan conflict or be exploited by armed groups to, of course, influence, expand influence. And the other thing is national security starts with the community. Local resilience is the foundation for peace and security in the country. When people can sustain their livelihoods and share resources equitably, this leads to their adaptation. There will be less vulnerability as well to conflict. And also, climate shocks do not affect communities equally. Of marginalized groups, particularly women, disabled groups, and IDPs, bear a disproportions share of the burden. This inequality depends social fragmentation, which in turn undermines the stability and recovery. For instance, initiatives support women corporations in managing local irrigation schemes, or grazing reserves have strengthened social cohesion, and we've seen this happening in Somalia Joint Fund supported programs locally. So this will reduce in turn the risk of recruitment by armed groups, and then climate adaptation is therefore is not just an environmental issue, but it's central to peace and stability. So this is why it's important to understand the nexus solutions. And solutions, of course, should be integrated. So interventions that address only one dimension or ignores the climate dimension risk conflict. For example, investing in water infrastructure without having inclusive governance will not last. Equally, peace-building efforts that ignore climate shock is not going to succeed. So it's important to understand the interlinkage between peace, conflict, and security, so that we can break the vicious cycle between climate and conflict, and it also allows us to design holistic response.
Yeah, thank you very much. And if you may now pass on to Sarah Kim, maybe 2 to 3 minutes if you can reflect on your experience in understanding the nexus. Thank you.
So I actually won't cover maybe deeply what the nexus is, because I think Lula and others have much more eloquently examined this, and I thought the presentations from the ministries were excellent in laying that out. Let me just say why this is such a critical and urgent issue now. I think we've been seeing and observing for decades now, or beyond, that climate change is real, and it has been affecting the globe. And of course, some regions and some countries are more disproportionately affected now, but we know that this is a global issue. I think the reason why this is so urgent is because all global indicators point to climate change effects accelerating. Now, what does that mean? It means if you look at all the different graphs, you can see over the decades, it's slowly climbing in terms of the global warming and other kind of indicators having to do with climate change. Now what we're seeing is a sharp upward movement. And I think that acceleration is why this is such a particularly urgent issue. It means those existing vulnerabilities are going to be more quickly and exponentially worsening over time. And I think that's why this is such a critical and urgent issue. This is not a, yes, things are warming, but we can continue to work on solutions and it will get better. No, I think this is one of the key, environmental, but again, national security issues of our time. So I think that's one point I wanted to relay. And second, I just wanted to reemphasize Lula's excellent point that I think in development and in this space, we often do stovepipe how we think about solutions and interventions according to technical sector expertise. So you have your health folks, you have your peace building folks, you have your national security folks, environmental. But I think what Lula's point here is that this aspect of climate change is no longer a freestanding issue. It affects everyone. It affects every country. Now, what that effect will look like may be different, but I think we all have to come to an agreement that this is a global problem. And because of that, we can no longer treat this as a separate, hey, this is for the people who love nature and our environment. This is our planet and we live on it. And I think it affects every aspect. And I think the Ministry of Environment's, the slides on the effects of climate change was excellent, right? It shows you how this affects livelihoods. It shows you how it affects health. It shows you how this affects every single aspect of people and society and countries. And because of that, I think we can no longer treat this as a separate issue, and it absolutely must be integrated. So just those 2 points in terms of, I think, the urgency of the issue because of the acceleration of climate change, and the fact that solutions now must be integrated or it will fail. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bihi. I also join my colleagues. Just let me share a small example or a brief example where we can all understand. We, over the past 1 or 2 days, we've been talking the issue of charcoal production in the country. You know, what happens for a layman to understand, you know, how conflict and natural resource management and, you know, climate change are interrelated. For example, take when charcoal is produced from the rangelands, what happens is that the rangelands carrying capacity is reduced. And then the resources of both in the form of water and pasture get scarce. Then when you have scarcity, the communities around who used to benefit from those rangelands do not reduce the number of their herds or the size of their animals. They still have the same you know, number of herds, so in the form of goats, camels, or even sheep. And then the rangeland that they used to depend on cannot carry, you know, cannot meet the feeding requirements of their animals. So they have to move from one area to the other. Of course, movement has been an adaptive methodology to climate change. But once they move to another area, and then there is competition over that scarce resources. That competition gives rise to conflict, and then after that conflict rises, then it takes the form of clan, or, you know, today I think we heard several times how different clans were fighting over pasture and water. So I think the most important point is that for us to understand the interlinkage between climate change, conflict, and, you know, natural resource management is to inform policy making. If you know that you know that the sole issue is about scarcity, then you have to come up with, you know, conflict sensitive adaptation mechanism. For example, if you want to build water resources or develop water infrastructure, where are you going to develop? So it has to be participatory, consult the communities, and engage them from the get-go when designing the adaptation mechanisms for the communities. So maybe for the interest of time, I'll hand it over to my friend.
Thanks so much. First of all, I want to thank PDRC, given that this is my first time having the mic in the conference, for organizing this relevant and timely conference. And I'm honored to join these wonderful people. Coming back to the question, I think most of the panelists have answered well. I think from yesterday's presentations and the panel, they have given us many fault lines on what causes the displacement, how the interlinkages between the climate, peace, and security. And there was also an emphasis on the influx of urban rural migration, which is part of the fault lines. But mine, I want to emphasize that when we treat climate, peace, and security separately, we miss, you know, the linkages, and we miss the connection. And if we have an integrated planning, we can turn this crisis into an opportunity for peace building, right? So you see how the climate shocks in Somalia and how they interact with governance, how they interact with peace, how they interact with security. And there are many dynamics. Yesterday we have heard of how the drought, the floods interact, and if this hit, they already, you know, strain the fragile institutions that we have, right? And they fuel grievances across in terms of resource sharing, allocation, and this can heavily undermine the trust and the confidence of the government. So for me, I think what I'll look at in terms of what one of the panelists yesterday said on how can we have a whole government approach in terms of looking at different line ministries, how they work together, and how can they integrate this into planning? How can they integrate this into having a coherence and a coordination platform whereby the Ministry of Security, the Ministry of Interior, the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change can work together and have what we call climate peace security units, where they can able to interact, share information, and at the same time have a proper planning in terms of the early warning preparedness. Then at the same time, let's look at the other side where we have the community. Yesterday we had a very interesting panel discussion with indigenous communities where we get a first-hand information. But also, can we look at how can we have a whole society approach where we can have the civil society, the women, the youth, the IDPs, the marginalized, the private sector, having a conversation on these critical, things that, and this can help in terms of having a participatory early warning mechanism where it builds the confidence of the community, it builds the confidence of the business community, the diaspora, and have a proper planning, and this can be integrated, and then we can turn the early warning into an early action. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Ali, and if it's your first day, welcome to the hot seat. And yeah, but I would like to turn on to Jethro, and colleagues have touched upon on inclusive decision-making, integrated or comprehensive systems, early warning, and all that. I just wanted to pass on to you. The recent UN hotspot mapping study indicates that nearly half of the Somali population are affected by overlapping environmental, climate conflict, and socioeconomic pressures. How do climate shocks and stressors influence recurrent clan conflicts and security? And perhaps if you can elaborate more maybe on how can we improve data collection to better capture these interlinkages?
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you very much for PDRC for hosting this rich discussion. I think the figure that you cited is indeed very striking, but we also need to be somewhat careful, I think, about how exactly we interpret such statistics as well. So the data is very good often at capturing correlation, but it's not always as clear on the causation pathways. And so what to do about this, I think we need more longitudinal studies that really track climate stresses in the context of political and economic changes over time. And I agree with what some of my colleagues have said as well about the importance of community level grassroots research as well. So how do people actually experience this and these multiple intersecting pressures on the ground? In terms of how better to kind of capture these interlinkages, we recently concluded a big study on Kurbajogi or Samafal, on sort of diaspora humanitarianism, which is across the kind of Somali territories. And one of the things that came out from there, which was really interesting, was actually just the sheer amount of data and responsiveness that's captured within, for example, WhatsApp groups in terms of crisis response. So I think when we're thinking about institutionally how to manage that, then practitioners and institutions can learn from those parallel systems.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'll now turn on to Lula. And I'll now turn on to Lula, and just to maybe elaborate more from action from advocacy to action. We always hear this awareness raising, capacity building, advocacy, and all that on to addressing this and the nexus. And while global efforts have long focused on reducing CO2 emissions, the reality is that climate change will continue to evolve and change. How can we shift from advocacy to implementing science and data-driven policies that include rigorous risk assessment and early warning systems and localized adaptation strategies?
Thank you so much. I'm sure my colleagues can respond to this better than I do, but I think in terms of, at the global level, I think we should shift from, the top-down approach, just bottom-up approach involving CSOs, as my colleague earlier mentioned. We have a huge, knowledge with our civil societies, and yesterday we've learned from the panel discussions, we've seen how, how the community is adapting to climate change and respond to different shocks. So from the community level, I think we need to push up to policy level how, national solutions can be addressed in a better coordinated approach.
Well, thank you very much. I will now pose on to Hassan, and just skip in for a bit, and Sarah. And yeah, so perhaps the African Union has emphasized the need for integrated climate considerations into early warning and conflict prevention systems, and recently launching the Africa Multi-Hazard Warning and Early Election Systems. In your view, Hassan, how effectively could such integrated system be in helping communities anticipate and respond to climate-related security risks?
Thank you very much, Bihi. I think when it comes to data collection and for early action or for early warning, there is a lot of data collection in the country, for example, whether it is weather data or hydroclimatic data that is collected by different ministries at federal and state levels. But the issue is, how do we localize that and use them in the decision making for the communities that are in, for example, in a rural area? How do they get that information for decision making? Whether it is, for example, the focus on the rain, or if there is a focus on, a focus on El Nino or La Nina. So I think the issue is, how do we localize that and put it also in the government agenda? Of course, we all know that there are a number of good policies, strategies that are on the shelves, but how do we enable them to work at the community level? I think that is the most important one. And with the issue of early warning system, it is how to make, or for example, if you tell the communities how to communicate is also very important. The communities have their own way of focusing, and indigenous way of communicating, for example, in Somali. So I think we need, there is a break between the science data and how to convert that into data and information that can be consumed and used to make decisions by a pastoralist. I think that is the major gap that is missing in the context of Somalia, and I think that is where we need to put effort. The other point is also collecting data from not only using GIS or remote sensing or satellite data, but we also need to collect data and information from the communities so that it can feed into the national and state level data collection systems that are existing in the country. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe.
Let me just contribute a few. Yeah, I think I agree with Hassan. In terms of how can we leverage on the traditional indigenous knowledge in terms of weather forecasting and also looking at the weather patterns. Our communities have really relied for generations on looking at the traditional way of weather forecasting, be it looking at the stars, the animal behaviors, and and so forth. Even we have seen some even looking at the intestine of the animals when they slaughter it, so that they can predict. Very interesting. But I think the point here is, how can we have a hybrid of blending between the traditional indigenous knowledge and the scientific way, and this can enhance not only the accuracy, accessibility, but also the communities, making it more legitimate and trusting the information. And at the same time, if we're able to look at, can we institutionalize the early warning system so that communities can help prepare, and this can enhance the capacities of both the institutions and the communities to work together, and this can improve the adaptation mechanism.
Oh, well, thank you very much. And yeah, that's very frightening, the data gap that exists out there. And I'll now turn into Sarah, and I would like you to reflect maybe on localizing global responses. Given the persistence funding challenges and resource scarcities, and how can we ensure that local knowledge, needs, and experiences are meaningfully integrated into the international climate and peace building processes? What mechanisms can enhance community participation in a decision making?
I think the primary principle here and the reframing here is about my two colleagues' point. It's about local, traditional, indigenous knowledge and practices, and we have to be back in tune with that. And that has to be the centerpiece of everything we do at the grassroots level. Now, additional civil society and international expertise can, of course, bring new innovation and ideas and technologies to bear, but that should never overtake what currently exists and how these communities have been managing and dealing with these issues for generations. So I completely emphasize and underscore this idea of this hybrid partnership and a hybrid approach. And I think this is also, practically speaking, how you can do this from an intervention standpoint. This is where that integrated programming approach can be very helpful. In peace building and governance programs that we do now, so much of that is about how do we have listening sessions with communities? How do we have town halls? How do we continue to establish these joint peace committees or joint resource management committees, and to be able to feed into those existing community level structures and institutions, be it informal or formal, it does not matter. It should be, the centerpiece should be, how does this community do business? What are they most comfortable doing? How can we continue to support existing mechanisms and ways of managing themselves and communicating amongst themselves? That, I think, it should be the centerpiece of all of that. And, you know, I think this is also where you have to think about moving forward. There are technologies and innovations and new ideas that might not be resident here in Somalia. So there are lessons to be learned globally that could be drawn together, and that could be a package of lessons learned and best practices that I think globally we should be starting to share. But I think, again, this is where we have to be, again, cognizant of the community-centered approach here. Solutions should not be just, hey, here's a new shiny piece of technology or a new shiny way of doing things that's not resonant with the Somali way of doing business. It really should be what can be low impact, low cost, scalable, and sustainable. So if this is a way of doing business, or if this is a technology and approach, utilizing resources that is not resident and natural to that community, it ought not to be adopted. And I think those are the sorts of trade-offs that we have to make. Just because it worked well in one context does not mean it's going to work well here. And I think interrogating that constantly has to be, and this is where I'll bring the donor community and INGOs and others into play. That's where we have to reframe how we approach this. Your way is not the best way. It has to be adapted to what's in the community and how they can carry it forward. Because if they cannot sustain it themselves in the long term, then it's something that we should consider. What is the trade-off of implementing this type of short-term solution to gain certain results? But then how do you begin to transition that into more traditional ways of sustaining this within the communities?
Oh, well, thank you very much. I would like to turn it to Jethro, maybe, and for a bit. And Jethro, you listen to your colleagues, and Sarah talked about partnerships, and Hassan talked about integration, policymaking, inclusivity, and all that. I just wanted you to reflect on perhaps and amalgamating this effort and streamline and making sure that the issues that addresses and efforts that addresses climate change are streamlined and institutionalized, and to make sure that things do not happen in silos. So how can we make sure that efforts to address climate change is streamlined and institutionalized at a local level?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and a big question as well. Thank you. I think I would echo what was just said before as well, about the need to, yes, have localization, but also to be aware that actually local responses to things like drought and conflict and climate stresses are already in some ways global. We have the WhatsApp groups which have Kurbajog with diaspora on, all over the world, and whilst these have their own exclusions as well, they function a lot quicker and a lot more effectively than a lot of the existing humanitarian response. So when we're thinking about how to work with existing systems, which I think is the way forward rather than reinventing the wheel, that would be my first point. But I also want to make a brief point, just because we spoke at the start about framing the nexus, and I think that is very important to do. And I kind of want to be the pesky anthropologist here in the room a little bit and sort of question the fronting of the climate framing a little bit, in the sense that climate impacts, I think the research is very clear, they don't directly cause conflict, right? They work through existing vulnerabilities. So when we're talking about those compound vulnerabilities, that matters because how we design implementation and effective interventions, when we design them with climate in mind without addressing the underlying sources of conflict, then we're not actually addressing the kind of problem. And I think pastoralism is a great example of this, right? We know that herders have managed drought for centuries, but in recent years you get extreme demand for meat from the Gulf markets. This makes the sector less resilient, it increases competition, commercialization. So now when a drought hits and there's water scarcity and conflict emerges, is that a climate problem or is that a political problem? So it's not just water scarcity, climate change equaling conflict. There are real political and economic drivers underlying a lot of these things, which I think must be incorporated into these kind of framings if we're going forward. So for me, that question is also about whose interests does the climate framing serve as well? Yeah, I hope that's answered some other question.
Oh, well, thank you very much. And maybe I now turn to Lula, and echoing on what Jethro was saying, that majority of it is economic hardships and challenges in financing. So I just want you to maybe reflect on the climate finance in a fragility context. And despite growing interests in climate finance, fragile and conflict-affected regions like Somalia continue to face significant barriers in accessing the funds. The Declaration on Climate Relief, Recovery and Peace adopted at the COP 28 and 29 calls for increased financial flows to such contexts. So maybe, Lula, what practical steps can be taken to ensure that climate finance reaches or trickles down to the most vulnerable communities?
Thank you so much. So in fragile states like Somalia, I think the challenge is not the climate financing. The financing is there. The question is, how do we get these funds reach the vulnerable communities? And I think current models assume that institutions have strong systems and stability, and this is not always the case. With fragile states, most of the time do not always have such strong systems. So we need a mechanism that is simpler, more flexible, and able to operate through local NGOs, CSOs, UN agencies, government institutions, and grassroots organizations. And I think one way of addressing this is simplifying access. Global climate funds like GCF should establish a dedicated fragile window for countries like Somalia to access this fund and make it easier for them with faster disbursement and technical support. I know some global funds also provide enablers fund, so that the governments and other institutions do build their capacity before receiving funds. The second one is channel resources locally and reduce risk. I couldn't agree more with Sarah. I think local communities, we have to shift how we see local communities. There are critical partners in climate action and not just recipients or beneficiaries. So for me, practical mechanisms should empower local-led solutions, investing in local organizations. And the other and last one is integrating conflict sensitivity. We've said that climate finance must reduce and not fuel tensions. So for that to happen and ensuring that resources like water, livelihood are shared fairly and equitably with accountabilities, of course, in place, conflict sensitivity should be integrated in such systems. And I think it's also the same that came out strong during the Africa Climate Summit for calls for reform to the global financial architecture, so that climate finance is not only accessible and equitable, but also tailored to realities of fragile states like Somalia.
Well, Well, thank you. All right, Hassan, you want to reflect on?
I wanted to add a few points on the issue to do with climate finance. I think what Somalia is receiving from the vertical funds, whether it is the Global Environment Facility or GCF, is quite, minimum compared to the demand and, the gap in climate financing that's existing in the country. So I think here what we need to do, and also developing projects for vertical funds is not easy task. It requires a lot of technical knowledge. It requires a lot of, data and information collection. And, the approval process is not also as fast as we need. But I think, as Lula said, there are discussions between, least developed countries and the vertical funds on how to simplify and also increase the amount of funding that these least developed countries receive from the vertical funds. But the point that is also important is, I think we also need to look inwards. For example, in Somalia, we need to develop, or governments need to develop, whether at federal or state level, need to develop a business case for investing in climate adaptive or businesses, for example, or green businesses. For example, in Puntland, you have seen communities investing in huge infrastructure like ports, and you can imagine, the amount of funds that communities have invested in that. Why not direct such or an energy which is to that level, mobilize the diaspora, the private sector to invest in, in the agriculture sector, in the livestock sector, but not that also calls for a holistic approach where you also need to look at the markets. At the end of the day, once one produces, the livestock, you need the market, and you need a stable market. So I think that there is a need to look at it from a holistic perspective, not only at the funds that are receiving. The other point we also need to consider is whenever we receive resources, we just look at a project. We need to look at the bigger picture and then interconnect multiple projects that are addressing different issues, agriculture, livestock, and then maybe fisheries, so that to enable that at least the communities where you are investing on, they don't need investments maybe after the 2 or 3 projects that you have invested. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe Dr. Ali, yeah.
Quickly reflect. Thanks. I think GCF has set certain parameters in terms of access to the climate finance, and it is a competitive. And for Somalia case, I think there are certain significant barriers which limits in terms of access to this climate finance, from the political instability to the limited institution capacity, and also the coordination and the accountability aspect. So for me, I think how can we strengthen this? Number one is we need to have a robust climate finance structures so that we become competitive, the country become competitive, and looking in terms of strengthening the institutional frameworks and the capacity, from the coordination to the planning and also to the monitoring. I've emphasized initially on having a whole government approach, which I think this cascades from the national to the state to the district level, so that even at the district level they have a decentralized planning. And this, puts in place in terms of having all stakeholders involved in the planning and the coordination. And without forgetting also the private sector engagement, which is critical in terms of the climate finance, because these are very critical stakeholders. And if we are looking at in terms of bringing them in investing the renewable energy, the climate smart agriculture and the irrigation, this is where we need to build the public-private partnership. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks for highlighting a couple of issues: the involvement of private sector and investing in the important avenues. So I just wanted to maybe turn on to Jethro to maybe reflect on some of those.
Yeah, thanks. It was just a small point, just adding on to the great discussion about climate financing and the problem of accessing. I think one of the real critical issues, I think, is that climate funds, and to be frank, a lot of donor funds in general, they tend to favour often implementing in stable regions where you have stable institutions. So you have projects that can be managed more efficiently. It's clearer and easier to do that. But this can, when we're thinking about conflict as well, this can fuel perceptions of marginalisation. This can result in political fragmentation and conflict. I think we've seen this recently. So one way perhaps to think about this is how to work both with formal but also with traditional governance mechanisms at the same time as one of these kind of solutions. And that would also ensure that, A, you're reaching the most vulnerable populations, but you're also working within existing systems that do function, and not at the expense of communities that might find themselves in the gaps in between state authorities, so to speak. So that would just be my small reflection on that particular question. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I'll now turn on to Sarah. And Sarah, according to the UN, Somalia has one of the highest urbanization rates in the region. And how could project urbanization driven by rural unplanned settlement, human influx, conflict refugees meet the service demand? So basically how the government is compare a plan to absorb the unplanned and human influx coming into the urbanization and this fast growing urbanization, and how does that impact or influence the climate issues?
I think actually the community stories we heard from yesterday perfectly demonstrates what that impact is. I think this is the issue of forced displacement, urbanization moving outwards, which is kind of exacerbating some of these issues. And, you know, what can be done with this? I think this sort of relates a little bit to, you know, how from a top-down perspective you begin to plan for this and respond to it. You know, we're in an environment where I think funds and resources are highly restricted, and the problems are vast. So I think this is where all the pieces of the things we've just talked about can come together. When you have an idea of all the good data that's been collected to understand, you know, where the issues lie. So I think when you are then looking at a particular area like Puntland, what are the most at-risk and highest risk areas, and how will that then affect, on a second order effect, these kind of areas? So looking at you know, the coastal areas and the interior, kind of understanding where are the high-risk areas and how is that then going to push outwards the issues. I think beginning to identify that and prioritizing that, I think, is an important way to tackle this with the limited funds that we have and the limited capacity that we have, is to figure out then, okay, looking at the data, looking at what could be the issues that force kind of these additional kind of you know, challenges between the rural and urbanization issues. It helps you sort of make those kind of decisions about where to prioritize your efforts first, and then kind of expand outwards in how you respond to that. Yeah, that's all I've got.
Yeah, maybe I'll now turn to
just
Dr.
to
Ali.
reflect.
Yeah.
I think one key important thing for the government is to strengthen the durable solutions strategy. I'm happy I'm seeing my former colleagues here who have supported the government in developing the durable solution strategy for Somalia, SDC colleagues. And this is an emphasis where the aspect of the land tenure comes in. In the past few months, we have seen there is a huge eviction in Mogadishu, where IDPs, you know, were evicted from their shelters, and this is jeopardizing the IDPs' resilience, you know, mechanism and the adoption mechanism they have been working on. I think for the IDPs to have a self-reliance, the operationalization of the durable solutions need to be strengthened. And I'm happy also to see there's a commissioner from the IDPs and refugees from Baidoa. And this is where now the national government and the state to work together to have this durable solution strategy implemented. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. We will now turn on to the audience and we will take 2 questions. And we will start with Faisal Roble and then I'll go to the second one.
Thank you very much. I think this was a very interesting panel and discussion, admitting that vulnerability is already gauged. We know the data, we have the information, but it's still the issue seems to be challenging. I think I have a sort of an observation, first of all, for generally African countries, but particularly Somalia. There's an addiction to looking at foreign aid and foreign help. And that, in a way, suppresses our creativity. And I'm saying this simply because to do planning, and I think you all touched integrating and institutionalizing all those, to do a planning for the vulnerability that we have seen. First, falls on the shoulders of Somalis and Somali, period. Whatever comes from outside is just a handout to make you unable to do what you want to do. So we haven't done the Somali homework. We haven't done the simple things that Somalis can do to avert the crisis that we are having. From where I came from, we are still struggling with conceptualizing how to tackle climate change. It's a new thing, it's a big thing, it's something that's huge that even some people, developed countries cannot handle. A good example is the fire in Los Angeles, which costed us billions of dollars within 24 hours of burning. LA couldn't even contain that with all the technology. Why? Because the planning done in that neighborhood completely forgot for the years adaptation. With climate change, there's nothing you can do. You cannot clean the skies, you cannot do, all the things that chemistry and science, somehow is supposed to be handling. The only hope we have is adaptation, and I think we have fallen short on the adaptation. How can we adapt? And the traditional folks yesterday touched that. How can we adapt to the climate change, and what are the adaptation programs that we can do? The lead and the most knowledgeable people are the Somalis, and I think we need to strengthen that and forward that to funders, and funders will always have 3 things: political. These projects are funded politically, as you said, stable regions and what have you. Number 2, how attractive and data informed they are. So Kenya would be always more sophisticated than us to reach and tap on the financing, All these things said, we need to really challenge ourselves and put the financing and the aid as 3rd and 4th step, and then focus more on coming up with planning, land use planning. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the very academic discussion. My name is Hussein. I have been working on climate for the last 10 years, and my concern is now on, you talked about integrating indigenous knowledge into the scientific one. From the experience I have with the Somali community in the region, is about trust. Trust matters when it comes to scientific forecasting. And my challenge is always that, do we really invite indigenous communities to the discussions we have when we are doing on the scientific one? I will tell you one experience I have. I was working in Karamocha cluster in Turkana area. We did the scientific presentation on the forecast for the OND, October-November forecast. Before doing that, we invited communities to come up with their forecast and present it to us. They presented it, and then we did ours. And then we compared and asked them if they can understand anything from what we said. So what we are missing is that we don't invite indigenous communities to the stage where we discuss on the projections and forecasts we do regularly. Now, before yesterday, there was the Puntland Climate Something Outlook Forum here. My question is, did we invite communities whom we are working for? Is it practically working? So it's about trust. So I usually say if we want to agree and to make our information reach to last mile or the forecast to reach to last mile, we need to invite communities so that they are part and parcel of what we are discussing. Otherwise, nothing will work. Thank you very much.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Maybe we will quickly reflect on, I think there was one question and the other one was a reflection. And perhaps if I boss this to maybe, and you can take maybe 1 minute or less than 1 minute because we're about to wrap up, just to reflect on issue of localization and developing a tailor-made solution. It's not a customized, because what you guys, the space that you're coming in is just to support. But I think what Faisal was reiterating was that how can we ensure that local solutions for locally made, and the missing jigsaw piece is that adaptation.
Thank you very much, Bihi. I think I can't agree more with Faisal on the point he touched on. For example, in the Puntland case, you have some of the districts, the Ministry of Interior has supported districts to develop district adaptation plan together with the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change. Through UNDP's National Adaptation Program, we have conducted district or Puntland level vulnerability assessment, and then that informed state level adaptation plan. So when it comes to the documents and the frameworks and the strategies, we already have them. Even just take for the Puntland case. The issue is how do we implement them? I think the issue is we need to take those strategies and documents from the shelves and use them for informing the budgeting process of the government, either at federal level and state level and also at the district level. So environment and adaptation should not be considered a business of the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change. It should be the business of all the ministries, including Ministry of Finance, the Office of the President, the state, district level commissioners and all that. So I think we have to take a holistic approach in addressing that. We already have all the documents that I mentioned before. The issue is how do we make them work at the community level.
Thank you. Maybe Sarah, if you want to touch upon it.
One plug I'll make here is for why monitoring, evaluation, and learning is so critical to this, because I think the adaptation is great, and I think that that's something that should be integrated. But I think we're also now in a situation where it is unprecedented. The effects of climate change are unpredictable. I think that's the scariest thing. And once that unpredictable shock and stressor occurs, you never know what else it's going to shake out. So given that, using those adaptation strategies that might have worked in the past may fail in the future. So I think it's also about, yes, doing that integration
to countries, fragile states like Mogadishu, Somalia. So I think locally owned solutions are key for sustainable development. And we do have rich legacy of resources, as Hassan said, mediation and pastoralist adaptation models in the country. But these are underutilized in the global policy. So I think it also touches with the advocacy issue that you mentioned earlier. So we need to do a lot of advocacy. And of course, localization also cannot happen without trust, equity, and courage to transfer power. So that's also something we should ask ourselves how to do.
Well, thank you very much. I'm just a little bit against the time, and with the interest of time, I would like to stop it there. We should have gone hours and hours addressing and talking about this, but thank you very much. I'd like to thank you for your time and your expertise and knowledge, and thanks to everyone who is engaged and sharing for your insights as well. Thank you.
aad buu mahadsan yihiin runtii banelka cilmi iyo khibrad badan bay nagu soo siyaadiyeen inaan kasii faa'iidaysano oo sii dhegaysana waa jeclaan lahayn balse waqtiga aad inuu hayo oo runtii mar kastaba aanu xadidaynaa waxaan doonayaa insha allahu tacaala waxaan u bixi doonaa isu wax yar suga waxba intaynaan bixin inaan laba shay ka hadlo shay waxa weeye waxaan u baxaynaa brief aan soo qaadan refreshment yar oo 15 daqiiqo ah 15 daqiiqo markii laga soo noqdo waxaan gali doonaa prestationadii marka waa paper presentations ama cilmi baaris oo la jeedin doono shalay waxayna ka baaqday 3 paper presentation amaba jeedin cilmi baaris la jeedin lahaa marka waxaan u kala qaadnay laba qaybood baan u kala qaadnay oo qolkan iyo qolka ku xiga baa lagu gali doonaa haddii alla idmo waxaan rabnaa markaan soo noqono oo aan kafeega qaadan haddii alla idmo in labadan qol aan kala galno oo mataqaanaa xaggana waxaa lagu jeedin doonaa labo warqadood oo aad muhiim u ah sidaasoo kalena halkaana waxaa kusoo noqon doona labo warqadood marka waxaan jeclaan lahaa runtii inaan iskala qaybino oo labada maxaa la yihahdaa qol aynu isu kala qaybino waa waqti kooban oo haddii alla idmo ilaa 40 daqiiqo qaadanaysa prestationada aad baa u mahadsantihiin waxaan sidoo kale ku celinayaa caawo haddii alla idmo baan ka began doonaa wax kasta oo ku saabsan PDRC talkskii waxaan jeclaan intaana bixin hadday joogaan 4 qof oo leh cilmi baarisyada Dr. Cabdiraxmaan Nadiif Cabdullaahi Nadiif Baraa Cabdinaasir Cukaash iyo Cabdiraxmaan Yuusuf 4 hadday joogaan iyaguna inay halkaan noo yimaadaan si aanu u kala qaybino haddii alla idmo labada mataqaanaa bixin baa laga yaabaa